Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Elise. Grab a cup of tea or a snack. Today I've got a really long video for you. I hope that's all right. Waffle Flower has a wonderful new release, and a lot of the dies that they've released are meant for stitching on cards. So I thought I'd do a video showing you how I turned that stitching into cards to give you some inspiration on how to use these dies. Here is a look at a few of the projects that we are going to complete today. None of the stitching I have recorded. It's a little difficult for me to record my stitching just because I often do it sitting in front of the TV at night. I stitch. It's a great stress relief for me. Just something to keep me occupied, keep my hands occupied rather, while I do something like watch TV at night. So let's take a look at the basics. So let's look at the dies, some of the supplies I use, the thread that I use, and just a few tips. We're also going to look at stitching on the go and how I store some of my products. Okay, so here is a look at this is just some of the dies that Waffle Flower has released. I love these ones that are the pinking shapes. I have a hard time lining up things straight on a card. And so I love that this has a border that gets cut out and they look really pretty on a card. And there's also a lot of these border dies. So some longer ones, zigzag, hearts, circles, squares, so many great shapes that you can use. I just really, really love these. And this release was so fantastic. And I am obviously very excited about it because I think that there's a lot of things that we can do with these products. Here is a look at a few of the stitching that examples that I did. So this border creates little hearts. So you can see I've stitched them in alternating colors. And the ones that kind of create borders are either 5.5 wide or 4.25, so that you can line it up perfect on an A2 size card front. Here's that zigzag that I did in a rainbow with a light on top and a darker on the bottom. There's also a more solid zigzag that you can see. Then they have also released this die, which basically allows you to rub your panel on top of it and it will release the little dots. It's genius. And I know that Waffle Flower has a video on this, so go ahead and check that out. But if you're going to get these dies, I would highly suggest getting that one as well. Now let's look at my die cut sandwich. So I use a Gemini Junior machine, and you don't always use the metal adapter. They're the metal shim. I would highly suggest getting a metal shim if you don't have one to cut out intricate dies because it just allows for those little dots to release a little bit easier. So I have that in my die cutting sandwich to use as I make these just so that those little dots release easier. Here is a look at all of my embroidery thread. Not quite all of it. As you can see, I've got some solid colors on the left in rainbow order, and I've got some of these variegated threads on the right. Here is a look at one of those variegated threads. I use DMC floss. It is the cotton pearl floss in size number 5. So you can see it says 5mm right there. And there's also a little number on the thread to let you know what color it is. I then wrap these threads around these plastic bobbins. You can see I'm pulling one out here. Some of these bins come with paper bobbins, but I prefer the plastic ones as I can reuse them multiple times. And you can see I just write the thread number in the corner of that bobbin. And that way, if I need to repurchase, I know exactly which color it was that I used up. If I use up a color, that's a good indication that I should probably buy another one. I love this little container. All of the supplies, including this container, are linked down below. Now you can use like the traditional 6-strand embroidery floss, and every once in a while I break one of these out. But to be perfectly honest with you, I much prefer the other thread. And that's mostly because the strand is all connected. I find it really hard to thread a needle with this 6-strand floss. And lots of times I get annoyed and I can't be bothered to thread it. And I just rather use the DMC Pearl 5. I also think that it's just slightly thicker, and I like that look. All right, moving on to needles. I've got this little nifty needle container that's magnetic, so all my needles stay in there. Use a tapestry needle. So those kind of have a dull end, and that way you won't stab yourself while you're stitching. I often use like a size 18 or a size 20. A 22 would work. Most of the tapestry needles come in like a variety pack, so just see which one works for you. And like I said, I love that little magnetic container. It's so handy. Now, I often do some stitching on the go, in the car, on vacation, and I have this little neoprene pouch. That actually comes from Erin Condren. And in it, I just keep some of my supplies. So I usually have a few pieces that I can use to stitch on, some pre-cut pieces, some tape in case I need it. I usually, in one of those plastic containers, keep the thread that I'm going to work with, a pair of scissors, those kinds of things, just so that I am ready whenever I want to do some stitching. It's all there for me. A pair of these like little mini scissors, these are those Tim Holtz one, are perfect just to have and to cut the thread. Okay, so let's look at a basic cross stitch. So you're literally just making little X's as you go along. So come up one hole, across to another, like kitty corner, I guess you would call that, and make yourself a little X as you go along. On this piece, so this is the Lacy Squares die from Waffle, and I've just used that square kind of border stitchable and cut it out 3 times, so that I'll have 9 little squares to do. And the pattern idea for this is that I will do alternating dark and light rows for kind of an ombre effect. So as you can see, I'm just working my way up and down. This is a pretty tedious activity. I'm not going to lie. I don't think that cross stitching is for everyone. But if you are like me and you like to be productive and you like to feel like you're doing something at all hours of the day, type A people, where are you at? Then you might enjoy doing stitching at night. Okay, so when I switch colors or when I run out of thread, what I do is I just run the thread across the back of some of what I've already stitched and then hold the end in place for a row, like a stitch or two, and then it will hold. That way I don't usually have to use tape. Sometimes I use tape just on the very first stitching, but this way the threads are all contained, makes the back a little bit neater, and you don't have a bunch of loose threads just hanging out. Also, you're not going to risk pulling the thread completely through and getting frustrated, so I often just run my thread through some of what I've already stitched on the back. I just wanted to show you some of this stitching as an example, especially because the rest of the video, there is no stitching. It is just me turning my stitching projects into cards. Now you can see I've got a little bit of a plan going. So I've got my 2 blues. I've also got 2 pink and 2 purple threads that are kind of close in color to each other to make some like a variegated look without using my variegated thread. Although you'll see in my projects, I use that variegated thread a lot. So let's look at the most basic projects. Basically, when I think about a basic project, I do my stitching and I add a sentiment. Nothing fancy, no complicated background, no coloring images to add, nothing. So here's that first card, and I just did that die cut hugs onto that stitched heart border. That oversized hugs also came out in this release from Waffle. Just going to run that through my die cut machine. The cardstock is Dusty Rose from Gina K. Using some Lawn Fawn liquid glue to just add that onto my project. Making sure that that die cut is in place where I want it. Pressing it down, and then I'm adding some glitter pen over the die cut to add a little bit of interest. This is by far the most basic, right? You've taken a lot of time to do the stitching, and oftentimes I want the stitching to stand out on its own and really be the focal point of my card. So just adding a plain sentiment is oftentimes what I lean towards. I use foam tape across the panel to lift it up. Because of that thread, you really can't just glue it flat down. You really do need foam tape so that the card front is flat on your card base. And now I have a little Hugs A2 standard card. All right, let's look at the next example, which is that using that rainbow zigzag stitching that I showed you earlier. So I am using sentiments from the rainbow stamp set. This stamp set has so many good rainbow sentiments, rainbow themed sentiments. For those people, if you make a lot of rainbow cards like I do, you need this stamp set because it's just great sentiments that you will use time and time again. So I'm just playing with how I want this to sit, and I thought maybe I just have it sit straight across. Breaking out my new black Misty. I just got this. This is its very first time stamping, and I love it. I think it's so fun to have a little mini Misty that is black. So just going to go ahead and line those up using I've broken out my Misty creative corners to make sure I've got that straight. And then I will use some VersaFine Onyx Black ink to stamp my sentiment. Now you could add sequins, you could have cut out that zigzag border. I think that would be a lot of fun. But like I said, for me, oftentimes I'm looking for something basic. I've spent a lot of time stitching, and I just want my stitching to stand out. So now you can see I'm going back through with the foam tape. I used a lot of foam tape in the making of this video, and adhering that down, and that is the card. Now I've got this panel. This was a really interesting panel. So I did some diagonal stitching and some straight stitching, just like a running stitch. I've got these star-shaped dies, and I'm going to be using a sentiment from the Fresh Rainbow Sentiments, using some Gina K in the navy ink because that's the cardstock that I've used to do my stitching on. There you can get kind of a better view of it. Just says, let your light shine. And I thought that would be fun. On that stitching panel, every 7th row is yellow. And then in the corner, I just did solid navy stitching. Just adds a little bit of interest. I adhered that down with foam tape onto another panel of in the navy, and then just putting that down onto my card panel. And then I decided I wanted the sentiment to kind of stand out a little bit more, and I used some Tonic Nouveau glaze on it. Here is another one. This was a really fun panel to do. It's using the square pinking shapes, and I just did a bunch of different patterns. I'm adding just a little happy birthday sentiment that actually comes from the Homebrew stamp set. And then I will just use some foam tape to adhere this down. And now I have a little square 4 1/4 by 4 1/4 card. I think those are so fun, and they still fit in our regular A2 size envelopes because it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 envelope, and it will fit because it's just 4 1/4 by 4 1/4. I thought this made just a really cute little birthday card. Now for something a little bit more complicated, we're going to add a background to anchor our stitching and kind of add a little bit more interest. So here's a look at the first card. This is just a pretty basic die cut. So I've got my heart here, and I'm going to be doing that A2 piercing panel that you can use to poke out the dots. You can actually use it as a die as well. Just stamping a sentiment, all the hugs from the Here For You stamp set in Gina K Passionate Pink. I've got that variegated heart that I have stitched, and I'm actually using the stitching lines to line up that sentiment, which I've backed with some foam tape. And then I will add foam tape to the back of the heart and add that onto my pierced panel. I just used a light pink cardstock because I thought that matched the heart. And I went for a smaller sentiment again because I really want that heart to stand out as the focal point of my card. Using the little dots on that panel to line up my heart, I will add that to an A2 size card, and that will complete this card. A little bit stepped up from the basic examples, but again, not overly fancy. We're going to get a little bit more fancy with this next example. So this next example uses the circle pinking, and I just created like a rainbow of cross stitch on there, a little pattern, and I have used some sequins as the clouds that I've adhered down with a French knot. I am going to take a cloud stencil and some Daydreaming ink from Waffle Flower, and just ink blend some clouds for my so that I have a background for my rainbow to sit on. I'm using my Waffle Flower Mini Media Mat. I love this little mat, and a blender brush. I've also got some thick Post-it tape to keep my stencil down. I'm using Bristol Smooth cardstock to do my ink blending on. I get the best results personally using Bristol Smooth to do my ink blending. And magic of time, we've now sped up and you can see my panel complete. And this is just going to add a subtle cloud backdrop for my panel to sit on, my stitched panel. I'm going to do my sentiment. This also comes from the Rainbow Stamp set. And I'm just using that Gina K in the navy ink again. It says, wishing you rainbows and everything wonderful. Just a nice universal stamp set I feel like we can use all of the time. Again, using my Misty to get a good placement. Using some foam tape to pop up that sentiment underneath my clouds. And then I will use foam tape to pop up my stitching panel on the cloud. Then I will adhere this down onto an A2 card front. And that is my card. Moving on to some advanced projects. Typically for these, that involves me doing some sort of coloring, adding more elements, and I'm very thoughtful about the way that I stitch my projects. Usually I look at a stamp set and have a project in mind that I want to stitch with and how I want to do those. So you'll see this first one, I've got these little fishes, and they're from the Mermaid Mail stamp set. And you can see I've got that A2 nesting banners on the side, and I have die cut the circle stitchables, and I've basically created like 3 little like fish tanks almost for my fish. And that stitching is very basic because I'm not going in and out of every hole. I am just going across the entire row, and I just did 1 vertical, 1 horizontal, and 1 diagonal. That stitching took me a whopping probably 4 minutes. So that's an easy way to get the stitching look. Now just using some Copic markers to color in these fish. I wanted them to be warm toned fish, so red, oranges, and yellows, because I used a variegated thread that was teals and blues, and I didn't want to use teals and blues to color my fish, or else I thought that they wouldn't stand out very well. So I'm just going to go ahead and color these little guys in. I love this stamp set a lot, and I'm going to use it again in another project here coming up. This is nothing fancy Copic coloring. I'm a very basic colorer. So now I'm just going to get my sentiment down. It's from the Under the Sea stamp set. I wanted to get that down before I adhered everything to make that as flat as possible. It says long time no see. I think that's really fun. So now I can go ahead and add some foam tape to the backs of my little fishes and add them down into their little tanks. And I am just going in kind of rainbow order. And I like that they're kind of swimming in opposite directions. Once I have those adhered, I am just moving on to completing my card. So adding some foam tape again to the back of this banner, and I'm going to add that to an A2 size card panel that is out of A2 cardstock. And then I can go ahead and adhere that down to an A2 sized card base, and that completes that card. So you can see how we've gone from something basic to something a little bit more amplified and something that takes up a little bit more time. And there's a little bit more thought that goes into it before you start stitching to know which stamp set you're going to use. This next card might be my favorite. It's this mermaid on this waves chevron stitched background. I had so much fun with this one. So you can see that background is there on the left, and I've got my mermaid. By the way, all of my Copic coloring, today I'm using the Hero Arts black, the intense black, which is Copic marker friendly. Just going ahead and stamping down my mermaid. I'm going to get her stamped down a couple of times. That way I get a really crisp black image. And from there, we are going to move on to the Copic coloring. You can see some of the markers that I've used. I've also got a white gel pen. Don't always use a white gel pen, but I thought for this card it would be really fun. I am coloring her tail in some BGs. That just made the most sense to me. I feel like mermaid tails are blue-green. I've got her top in a pink. Her hair is kind of a blonde color. And then I am using some of that white gel pen. I will use it on the waves on her fin. And then in her hair, where those kind of like seaweed vines are, and a little bit on the clamshell in her hair as well. If you have made it this far and you are still watching, thank you so much. Be sure to comment down below. I'm assuming that you're watching still because you also enjoy stitching, or maybe you want to get into stitching. It's so much fun. If you've never tried it, I highly encourage you to try it. I've been stitching on cards for a few years now, and it's so great. It provides me with an extra hobby, something to do, and I feel like people really, really love the cards that they get with the stitching on them. So be sure to let me know in the comments down below if you also stitch, and what folks that you give your stitching cards to think about them, because I think for a lot of us, it's really, really special to give somebody a card that you've hand stitched. Just finishing up my coloring, and then I will go in with the gel pen to finish it off. Like I said, I don't always add the white accents, but I really like it. Also, I finally feel like I've found a white gel pen that I love, and it's the Uniball Signo white gel pen. I'm pretty sure it's the one Christina Warner suggests, and I highly trust her opinions on things. I do also add a little bit of that Lawn Fawn glitter pen to her top, just to add a little something else as well. I'm going to say it right now. I feel like this is one of those cards that I'll never want to give away because I just love how much it turned out. I'm sure a lot of us have cards like that. So once I have completed my coloring, we just move on to card assembly. So I've got some foam tape on the back of my panel, and I'm just adding that to some Gina K Sea Glass cardstock, trying to get that nice and centered. And then I will go ahead and die cut out my mermaid. By the way, that is from the Mermaid Mail stamp set. I've got some foam tape on the back of my mermaid as well. Love foam tape, love the dimension it adds to cards. Trying to figure out where the center is and place her down. And then I will just use some tape runner and adhere that down to an A2 size card base. You guys know the drill. And that completes another card. I've got one more card example for you guys. This last card is another one that I had a lot of fun with. It's a slimline sized card, and it's got these little crabs dancing along like a beach border. So I've got little crabs. Those are so, so cute. and those come from the C Birthday stamp set. I'm just going to go ahead and stamp these repeatedly, and I end up with 8 little crabs. And once I have got those crabs done, I can move on to some of the other card assembly. So I want to take one of the Slimline or the Slim Layers dies and cut out some blue cardstock, and then I'm going to go ahead and score my card base. My card base for slim cards folded is 8.5 by 3.5, so I just cut an 8.25, sorry. So I just cut in that cardstock down to 7 and then score it at 3.5. Going to go ahead and take my sentiment again with that Hero Arts black ink. It's that sorry you're feeling so crabby, which I think is so cute. I'm just putting that down in the center of that panel. And yes, I'm letting my panel hang out the Misty. We're all going to survive. It's fine. I didn't want to break out another Misty. Just going ahead and using R29, R27, and R24 to color in these crabs. Just going to show you coloring one because I colored all of them the exact same. Going darkest to lightest, as I always do. I think these crabs are so cute. I definitely love the stamp set. It's illustrated by Big Bear and Bird, and I often really love their illustrations. Just completing that coloring. And then I will die cut out all of these little crabs using the coordinating die set. Get all of my little crabs die cut, and then I am going to pop up 7 of them. I like to use odd numbers. Your eye actually prefers to see odd numbers than even numbers. So I've got 1 crab left over, but I'm just kind of popping them up so they're kind of crawling along my little beach border. And that thread is one of those variegated threads that I used. I really loved how this card turned out. It was so much fun. Once again, foam tape on the whole back except for over my stitching, and I can just pop that up on my panel. And it's kind of got that blue layer to anchor it and another white border on the edge. Really loved this one. I think this was another one where it'd be hard for me to give it away. Okay, that is all of my card projects for today. If you're still here, thank you so much. I hope that you enjoyed this and learned something from watching these. I know I have so much fun stitching, and this new release from Waffle Flower is amazing and really innovative. I've never seen stitching dies like this, so I'm really excited about it, as I'm sure you can tell. Be sure to subscribe if you want to see more from me. I'd love to have you here as a subscriber. If you hit the bell, then you'll be notified every time I upload. Go ahead and like this video. That really helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Like I said, all of the products that I used today are linked down below. So go ahead and check that description box out too, and I will catch you in the next one. Thank you so much.